Hey everybody, welcome back to the shop. Now that we've got the forward part of the cage and the Nova started, let's check out some door bars today. Also, you may notice that the shop's rearranged a little bit and this cutlass is parked here. That's a project that I introduced in another video, and it's actually going to be my own personal drag and drive car that I want to try to get running next year. I'll be putting the motor that's currently sitting in this cutlass in there. It's a supercharged big block Chevy, and if you're wondering why it's sitting in there and that car's there, then you're just going to have to go check that video out. But let's get through the intro here, and then we'll check out putting some door bars in the Nova. Welcome to the Keefer's Hot Rod Shop YouTube channel. I'm Nick Keefer. All right, so welcome back. So we're actually inside of the Nova right now, and I'm kind of sitting on the floor structure here. And the first thing I'm going to want to do is come up with all the dimensions. So what I'll do is I'll kind of measure distance between these bars, and I'll measure the angles that they're leaned at, and that way I can draw everything out, make calculations, and what I'll do is once I have those calculations, I'll figure out what the length of the door bar and all that needs to be. And for this primary bar that I'm starting out with now, my only real obstacle is this armrest. And the owner of the car does want to keep the factory armrest. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take this straight edge, and I'm actually going to lay this across these two bars. So the lower part of the A-pillar bar and the main hoop here. And I'm just simply going to take a measuring tape and I'm going to measure the distance that I have to the kind of the tightest point of that armrest. Now, you can trim armrests and stuff to fit bars. Either way you want to do it, but in this case we want to keep it intact. So what I'll be doing is actually curving the bar around the armrest. Now, this main door diagonal is a 1 5/8 bar. So obviously its full width is 1 5/8. And since I'm measuring from the inside of the main hoop and that A-pillar lower piece of the door bar down there, I'm going to want to subtract the difference from 1 5/8, and that's going to give me how much interference I have with the bar pushing into the armrest. So at my tightest point, I'm seeing about 1.25 inches. And if this was a little longer, I can put it exactly where that door bar is going to go, but it's just barely shorter. So I'm just trying to get as close as I possibly can. But once again, I'm seeing that 1.25 inch number. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract that 1 1/4 from 1 5/8, and I'll get 3/8 of an inch. That's how much the minimum amount I'm going to want to actually deflect that door bar is. Now, this might be bumped out a little bit on the door panel, and you know, I might not want it to hit against this every time the door is shut. Also want to give a little bit of room for stuff to move around if necessary, especially considering this whole chassis is coming out of the body and going back in, and there's a lot of final adjustments to be made. So instead of just that 3/8 number, I'll probably curve the bar at least 1/2 inch, and actually I might consider a little bit more, but that's a good number to have. I'm going to work on measuring these distances between the bottom of the bars here, also the height that this main piece is going to sit at. Keep in mind that this main door diagonal needs to cross the driver's elbow and shoulder when they're sitting in the seat. Structurally, I want to tie that in right where this rear hoop joins the main hoop. I can move around just a little bit, but just kind of as these roof bars line up with the rear down bars, the strongest possible way to build this is with everything meeting without cantilevering other tubes, like this main hoop in this instance. So now that we have that dimension, I'll measure all the other ones up and we'll go design the bar, and then we'll work on cutting it out, bending it and notching it and fitting it to the car. Also, one last thing I forgot to mention, now that we have that dimension that it's going to need to clear the armrest by, we also want to go ahead and we'll put the tape where the bar is going to go, and we want to get that dimension of where it crosses that armrest. Doing this and looking at this kind of just measuring tape being in place will also give you an idea of where exactly that bar is going to cross the armrest, and will assist in making sure that you get the right dimension when you measure using the straight edge method here. Another dimension we're going to need, and so that's going to help us here in just a bit. Alright, so I've done a little bit of math to figure out how the door bars need to be bent and notched. And here's my basic sketch of the door bar, kind of set up between the front edge of the main hoop and the top edge of the rocker bar, behind the back edge of the lower piece of that A-pillar bar. I figured out what length that needs to be, and I have also figured out, using the distance I want it to be from straight, how much I'm going to need to bend the bar. I considered a couple different scenarios, one being 1/2 inch and one being 3/4 inch, and figured that respectively I'd need to bend it either 2 or 3 degrees right here. So that's how it needs to be bent. I've also been working on calculating notch angles and offsets to account for the angle and marking it and all that stuff. So now it's going to be time to go ahead and mark the tubing. Then we'll get ready to notch everything and fit it up in the car. Alright, let's cut some tubing. Cool. So now that I've got both tubes cut, I need to mark where the bend to clear the armrest on the door is going to go on both bars. So I know that that bend is going to be 22 inches from kind of the center line of the notch on the main hoop side of the door bar. And what I've done is I've cut both of these tubes with 3 extra inches of material to make up the material of that notch, how it fish mouths around both the A-pillar and the main hoop bars. So what I'm going to do is take half of that 3 inches, so 1.5 inches, and add it to that 22 inches. And so 23.5 inches from the end of this tube, I'm going to make that 3-degree bend to clear the armrest. So I'm going to mark those now, and then we'll set them up in the bender. Another thing is, typically what I'd want to do is actually calculate how long a bend will be, and also how far offset the end of that bend will be from a straight line going through one part of the tubing. But since this is only a 3-degree bend, it'll barely take up any material, and all the dimensions will be so small of the bend. I'm actually just going to slide this line just a little past the line that I've marked in my bending die to indicate where the bend starts dimensionally, and just give it the 3-degree bend, and I'm not going to worry too much about figuring everything out since it's such a minute, small dimension. The way I'm going to get precision with these is after I bend them, I'm going to make all my final measurements on that bent piece. So for instance, the length I'll measure just from the first notch to where I need to make the second notch on each piece, and I'll do that the same on both of them, and I'll just simplify everything and ensure that they're going to fit perfectly. So I've got the first tube set up in the bender, and I wanted to show y'all just kind of how I'm setting it up. So these gold lines are for something else, but this black line right here is the mark that the bend dimensionally starts from. So the actual bend in the metal will have a little bit of feature before this line, but the way I arrived at this position is I bent a piece full 90 degrees and then measured from the center line of that bend, the ending ray, to that distance, considering the 6.5-inch center line radius that this die is designed for. And I put the tube back in and arrived at this mark. And so that's basically how I calibrated this die and how I know where that bend dimensionally starts. Alright, so I've got the tube clamped in here, and I'm going to go ahead and put that 3-degree bend in it. So I'm going to keep poking it, nudging it, and I'm going to let it back loose a number of times and just see what the spring back value is, and try to get it right on or right before that 3-degree mark, with the hydraulic ram not pushing on it. So let's try to do that, and then we'll measure the tube and see what it came out to. Alright, so that's saying right at 3. Ended up bending it a little past 5.5 degrees total, and then it seemed to settle right back at 3. So I'm going to pull this out and measure it with a angle finder, and we'll see what we got. Alright, I've got the tube set up with the angle finder resting against it. If you're wondering, I used these stacks of plywood just to bring the angle finder up closer to the center of the tube so that it's resting against that outside edge. But it looks like this thing is saying it's right at 3 degrees. So that's perfect. That's what we're looking for. And I think these are going to work pretty well. All right, and here's a real surefire kind of way to ensure you get your dimensions correct. Just measure the most important dimensions. So the whole point of this was to gain about 3/4 of an inch of kind of trough in this bend. And so what I've done is I've used those same stacks of plywood and the straight edge that we used for measuring the car in the first place, that clearance to the armrest from the inside edges of the A-pillar and main hoop tubing. And I've just laid it across here end to end, and I've measured this trough here, and I'm getting right about 3/4 of an inch. I needed 3/8 of an inch, and I actually went back and forth on whether I wanted to bend it to 2 degrees, which would give me, I calculated out, half an inch or 3 degrees. I calculated out 3/4 of an inch, and I decided to do it for Dale and bend it to 3 degrees, which was 3/4 of an inch and gives 3/8 of an inch clearance between the bar and the armrest. And I figure, hey, maybe if somebody shuts their finger in the door between the bar and the armrest, that 3/8 of an inch will save them. I don't know, but it just made sense to me. So we're looking good here. That's exactly what I wanted. I'm going to bend this other tube, and what I'll do is I'll just put them up against one another and make sure they're the same. And then it'll be time to start marking this thing up for notching. All right, let's get that second one bent up. All right, so got both bent and brought them back over to the bench, laid them down together, and they laid together really nicely. So I know that they're bent really close to the same, and now it's just time to go ahead and mark them for notching. All right, so I've got this marked for the first notch, and just to kind of go over what I've done, I've measured from the center of the bend, which I know is 22 inches from the center line of this notch, the center line of the trough of the notch, but you have to keep in mind it's at an angle. So I calculated this triangle here that you might be able to see, but what it is, it's the angle of the notch. So this tube is going to be angled at a 23 3/4 degree angle, and the main hoop is leaned back at a 9 1/4 degree angle. So that adds up to 33 degrees. So my notch is going to be 33 degrees, and I've calculated that for half of the thickness of the tube, which is 13/16 of an inch, it's 1 5/8 tubing, I'm actually going to be about 17/32 of an inch. I need it to be that much longer from the center line of the notch where I start notching it at that 33 degree angle. A little complicated, but it basically just tells me where I need to start that notching at an angle into the tube, starting on the long side and then finishing on the short side of the tube. So I'm going to go take it over to the notcher, set it up, and go ahead and make that one, and then I'll make some measurements, and then we'll get going on that second one. Setting the door bar up and the tube notcher here, and one more thing that needs to be kind of accounted for is the actual angle of the main hoop where this is meeting up to attach to it. So we've already accounted for the lean back of the main hoop, but it also, that bottom part has a little bit of angle to it. And so what I've done is I've actually rotated this some just to account for that. It's not horribly crucial if this isn't perfectly planar, as in like the bend goes in and out and not up or down at all, but I want to get it as close as I can, and what I can do is I can kind of fine tune it a little bit with the die grinder and a drum sander. So that's how I have it set up in here, and I'm about to go ahead and put some cutting oil on this thing and go ahead and notch one side, then we'll measure up and notch the other side. All right, so got the first end notched, 33 degrees, and like I explained, I kind of tilted it a bit so that the main hoop will sit in it at its angle, and then this will still lay kind of planar and flat. Now what I need to do next is actually measure. So I'll measure from the short side of this to the long side of this notch, just the total length, and that'll ensure that the length is correct. Just don't want to complicate it by measuring up the curve and calculating all that out if I don't have to. I can just get that number directly, and then I'll set it up in the notcher, accounting for the actual angle difference between the main hoop and that A-pillar bar, and we'll check that out in just a bit. All right, cool. Got both ends notched. And now I want to test it in the car before I give it its final notch to fit down onto the rocker bar. But let's go check it out in the car first. All right, cool. So after making those two notches, I want to go ahead and test fit it in the car. For the final fit up, I'm going to need to make that notch for the rocker bar. But what I want to do first is just put it in, just lift it up a little bit higher than it'll be when finally installed, and just see if it fits. Wow, that looks really nice. These notches look like they fit right to the tubes. And there's just one more thing that I want to check out. All right, great, and that clears perfectly. It's got just a little bit of space there, which will allow for things to move around a little bit, like if the door panel pushes the armrest here out a little bit, or if the chassis moves around when I do the final welding. But otherwise, the notches look great. The lower one looks just about as good as the top. Obviously, I need to do a lot of work down there to get it to fit down on that rocker bar there, but it's looking good, and I think these are going to line up pretty nicely when that's down on the rocker bar. Alright, so I went ahead and notched up the passenger side door bar, just the same as the driver, but obviously mirrored, and it fits right in just like the other one. It's looking good. So now it's time to move on to this notch right at the bottom that I need to make on both tubes so that they fit down onto that rocker bar right there. So let's go over to the bench and check that out. All right, so I'm over here at the bench marking the driver's side door bar, and if we look at this, I need to mark where this needs to be notched to fit onto the rocker bar. And just kind of for reference, I've got this little length of tubing here representing the A-pillar bar, that lower part of the A-pillar bar. Now, I have calculated out the distance along the bottom of the door bar, the distance of how far that notch needs to go into the tubing. Regardless, I'll just show you on the real piece here. The number I came up with is actually this line here. This is how deep the notch needs to go in to center this bar on that intersection of the rocker bar and the A-pillar bar. And so if I keep this little piece in here and then put this protractor onto the bar and look at this from above, you can see how it intersects that joint, not in the middle of the mouth of the notch, but in the middle of where the A-pillar bar runs through. So this inside edge of the A-pillar bar. So that's going to be my next step. I'm not able to set my notcher up at this angle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it up to notch in this direction, but I'll look down it using a straight edge and make sure that the outside edge of that hole saw is going to end up going through the tube right before that mark. So I'll go set that up and we'll check it out here in just a sec. All right, so I'm back over here at the car, and before I make that final notch in the door bar, I just want to look over everything and make sure everything's going to be good. So you can see how the bottom of this bar is going to drop in once it's notched to fit on this rocker bar. But one thing that I want to look at before I notch it is actually the alignment of all three of these tubes. So you can see that in this case, using the straight edge, they're pretty much like perfectly in line, like within, I don't know, 32nd of an inch or so. And that makes it a little easier to make this notch on the bottom. If these were out of line, I would need to actually clock this tube in the notcher one way or another to put that notch where it needed to go. So if I looked at these two tubes, the door bar and the A-pillar bar, and say the rocker bar was out at this angle, I'd need to turn that tube in the notcher so that the notch would allow that tube to travel out in this direction. Say if it kind of looked almost like this floor triangulator, then I'd know the notch had to be kind of in the side of the tube. But in this case, it's almost perfectly planar, so that's going to make it really easy. What I'll do is I'll just set that notch up coplanar with this notch, and I'll show you how I do that in the notcher. Alright, so we're over at the notcher, and I've got the door bar all set up in here. So the first thing I want to look at is setting the depth of this thing. So obviously first I got the angle set up that I need to notch this at. But if we look down the straight edge, and so I'll line it up with the edge of the hole saw there, and then just make sure everything's straight. I like to look down the slotted feature of this arm here, but as you can see, go through the tube here. Let me line it back up. Looking at the edge of that hole saw, go through the tube and end up at that mark. So it's kind of hard to tell, but I've set it up just a touch shy also, because these hole saws tend to take a little bit of extra material there sometimes, and also I need a little bit left kind of on the bone for polishing and final fitting and all that. Another thing I've done, you might notice this mark here. I just set up this measuring tape kind of edge to edge of this notch, and it's just about 2 inches. And so I've just kind of centered that and looked straight down and marked the mark right in the middle. So it goes 1 to 3 with 2 right in the middle. And that's also kind of helped me to line up the hole saw. It doesn't look really lined up in the video, but you know, once again, you have to get the angle just right. You're looking at it and cutting it just a tiny bit shy. So that's kind of how I go through that. And then the way I make it coplanar, like I explained before, is I set up this level on this flat part of the notcher just to see what level is relatively, and it's just like a 1/2 degree to the left of the 0 line. And then put this little length of tube in here and stick this to it, and actually make sure that I get the same value. That tube just representing that notch positively instead of negatively. So that's how I get everything coplanar and lined up. Also keep in mind, another important thing is you're lining up the outside edge of the hole saw with this, not where it intersects. You know, so this notch will actually it'll kind of do this as it goes in. You don't want to start the intersection here, because then your notch will be way too deep. But I'm going to run this and we'll see how it fits in the car. All right, perfect. So I made the notch, and as you can see, it came out right at that mark. So that's sweet. And also you can see how far away this mark is from the actual edge of the beginning of that notch. So that's just kind of how it went. And notches like this are kind of annoying because you have to stop halfway through and actually cut part of the material that's notched away off, and then continue with the rest because it hits the back of the hole saw. But no big huge deal. I just used that cutoff wheel and it works great. I'm going to go ahead and clean this up a little bit. Just smooth all this out with that drum sander and round these tips off, and we'll check out how it looks in the car. All right, so here's kind of the initial fit up after that notch. You can see it's still a little high on the main hoop here, indicating that it's just a little long. I think I'll probably trim a little bit off of this end, but this is looking pretty good down here. So if we look at it from the front of the car here, the notch that I just made is jacked up all the way to here, and what I'm noticing is that this is sitting on the joint of these two tubes here. So what I'm gonna have to do is trim away, kind of notch it for these tubes, and then see how it fits, and that might actually bring the rear of the tube down to line up with that rear hoop that I was showing you just a second ago. So what I'm going to do is actually mark with a Sharpie where I need to trim this tube. I won't trim it quite that much, but it's just kind of looking through the camera here. And so what I'm going to do is grind that away with the drum sander on the die grinder, and then come back and see how that drops into place. I actually ended up having to go back and forth, just grinding a little bit off the bottom end of that door bar, going back and forth to the bench a few times, but I finally got it to fit really nice. So here's how it fits, and you'll notice that it kind of interacts with both of these diagonals, and it comes just short of this 6A front cross member tow bar. But what I figured out is on the other side of the notch back here, can't really see, but that tube actually came up and touched that 6A bar. So I ended up at one point having to kind of grind the tip of that fish mouth a bit to clear that. But this thing's fitting really nicely at this point. Only thing is, it's just a little bit high, a little higher than I want on the main hoop. And so what I want to do is take a little bit of length out of that side, and it'll also help close up that gap. There's just a little bit of a gap here, just because that angle's not quite down as far as it needs to be yet. So that's going to be the next thing. Then this should be fitting just perfect. All right, and here's a look at it kind of from the door area. you can see how this this fits a little higher than I want, and if I kind of rock the tube around a little bit, you can see there's a gap on top. Now the angle could be off just a touch, so I could try grinding the bottom a little bit, but the other thing is this tube needs to lay down just a bit, and I think that is going to make up that difference. So what I might do is I think I'm going to try just grinding the bottom a little bit, and I'll see how it fits. But more than likely I'll have to just take a little bit of length out of the whole thing. But I'll do that and get it fitted nice, and we'll check it out then. All right, cool. So you saw me make a few little adjustments with the drum sander on the die grinder there, and now it's fitting in the car really nicely. Looks really good up here. Fits nice and tight, and same at the bottom. You can see it copes into all those tubes really nicely. And the only thing that I'm still kind of messing with is just the height of this. I might take just a little bit more out of this just to lower it down on the main hoop a little bit, but I think I just about like it where it is right now. Here's a view from inside the car. Looks pretty good, and so does the front. And here's how it fits in the front. So you can see all these tubes that I had to clearance for. Here, I'm going to pop you up through this triangulator here. I got that super long notch fitting pretty nicely on the bottom there for the rocker bar there, and it's hard to see, but I got it clearanced for the outside of this front cross member 6A bar too. So it's looking pretty good, and like I said, I might take a little bit more out of it just to lay the top down a little bit, but otherwise I'm really happy with it. And now it's just time to go ahead and fine-tune the passenger side to do the exact same. All right, great. So as you just saw, I've been going back and forth with this passenger side door bar, just getting it fitted to that bottom joint there, and it's starting to fit really nicely. So just a little bit of fine tuning left, and it should go in perfectly just like the driver's side. I learned a lot, obviously, from doing the driver's side about how this particular one will fit, and it helped me kind of streamline the process of shaping it to all those tubes down there. It always helps, you know, to do one, get it just right, and then go to the next. And usually you can do it in much less time and get it just right. Well, these are looking great. Let's clean everything up. I need to weld under where the front bottom ends of those two door bars are going to sit. Then it'll be time to tack them in. Awesome. All right, so I've got the door bars pulled out, and now it's just time to weld under where they're going to sit here between the A-pillar bars and the rocker bars on either side. So let's check it out. All right, so I've got those joints all welded up where the door bars sit, and I fit the door bars back in. They needed just a little bit of grinding where the welds are, but let's check that out. They fit down there really nicely. You can see some of those welds. I didn't take it all the way or anything. I just took it to where it needed to be for the door bar to sit there. And the other side looks nice, fits nice and tight also. You can see where this weld pokes out, and then this one I already had long enough, so that's looking good. The upper notch looks good on both sides too. All right, so got those joints all welded up, and after that I made sure the door bars fit back in the car nicely, and I actually decided that I wanted to move the backs of them where they meet with the main hoop. I wanted to move those down just a little bit to line up better with that rear hoop, just be a little stronger and a little more visually appealing. And after messing with that for a couple hours, I got everything lined up really nicely. So let's check it out. And you can see kind of how I made everything line up a little better than it was before. And here's the other side. All right, so now that those are fitted in nicely, one step left to do before they're ready to be cleaned up and tacked in, and that is to drill all the gas expansion holes under where those door bars are going to sit on the main hoop and on the lower joints. Just for the purpose of when I go to finally weld all the way around and seal those up to the chassis, it won't blow that last weld bead out due to the expanding gases inside of the tube. Great, so as y'all just saw, poked all the gas expansion holes and even deburred them, and then I cleaned up around the area where those tubes are going to weld in with some sandpaper and wiped it all down with acetone, and everything's all nice and smooth. There's that hole, and then you can see kind of how I drilled these and cleaned everything up, did both sides the same, and so now just need to clean the door bars themselves up, and then it'll be time to go ahead and tack them in. All right, got the door bars all cleaned up, ready to stick them in the car. All right, got them in. Now it's just time to tack them up. All right, cool. Got the door bars all tacked in and they're looking good. You can see how they cleared the armrests and they're good on both sides. Fit up nicely and all. So that's looking really good. Really stoked about that. And if I completed all the welds and added a couple bars like kind of here and here to the subframe connectors, then technically it would be a 850 quarter-mile legal cage. So in order to make it a 650 cage, there's a little bit more work to be done. Namely roof structure stuff, and I need to turn these door bars into door X's. So that's going to be coming up soon in a video. We'll check that out, and I'll go over some of the math for doing all that. And I'm thinking about making another video with math, kind of going in depth on how I notched and bent these door bars, just kind of going in depth to show all the steps and all the math that I did to figure that out. Some of y'all are asking for a video after I mentioned it last time, so I think I'll go ahead and make one pretty soon. It's going to take a little bit of work, and I'm going to try to make it not terribly boring, but you might see one of those pop up pretty soon. But this is a really awesome thing to have done in here, and everything looks great. And we'll keep going on reinforcing those with the door X structure and all sorts of other stuff still to come on that project. Pretty soon also I want to start working on this cutlass too, so we might be checking that out pretty soon on the channel. But until then, I always appreciate you guys watching. Thanks for liking my videos and subscribing to the channel. And hope y'all take care, and we'll see you next time.